So Reggie Fils-Aimé, the ex-president of Nintendo of America, has released a new book called Disrupting the Game: From the Bronx to the Top of Nintendo. I have had the chance to check it out. What do I think of Regginator's story? So first, I just wanted to start with, what is this game? So, what is this game? What is this book? So Reggie, president of Nintendo of America for 13 years, and very much the face of Nintendo for the West. So my expectations of this book is like, okay, it's going to have like some cool focus on different Nintendo stories, bit of an autobiography. The reality of the book, though, and I'd known a little bit about his business past, is like almost, I'd say, a third of the book to almost half of the book is, obviously his early life. He didn't labor that too much, but also the other business ventures that he's had post Nintendo and pre Nintendo. Like, there's a lot on that, like Pizza Hut, Procter and Gamble, how he got into uni, all that kind of stuff. And then there's like 10 chapters on Nintendo. And it's a very short book. It's like only 224 pages. And the other part of it is, I thought it was going to be more like an autobiography. Honestly, like, this is a business book. Like, and that was the thing that like threw me the most. Like, this is definitely a business book. Every time, like, he's going through his stories, he has sections, and they're called "So What" sections. And it's just trying to crystallize the story, his approaches, behaviors, etc., into, like business principles or business advice.
Do you think that's because this was written by him, wasn't it?
Yes.
So do you think that's just because he felt that was more natural, like he could do that as opposed to writing like almost like an actual autobiography?
No, like, it was like, from what I understand, it was like an active choice. So I actually, listening to the book, so I not read, but I don't even know what you say. Like, I hate saying read the audiobook. That doesn't sound right. So listen to the audiobook. Yeah. Which, like, and I'll get to this later, but I think listening to the audiobook is superior to reading it, because there's a bonus part to the audiobook where there's an interview, like an exclusive interview with Jeff Keighley. And there's some really like interesting nuggets in that exclusive part that have, become stories, and it's a slow news week, so everyone's
Plus
writing
he's
stories
reading it,
about
yeah.
this book.
He reads
it.
Yeah,
which
that would be really cool.
These days is like a non-negotiable. Like, the author reads the book. Like, that's just like par for the course now, especially for these type of books. But he said in interviews, he said he wanted to write a business book. He wanted to try to like give that knowledge to the next generation and things like that, which is cool. But it just wasn't what I was anticipating. Like, when I started listening to it, I'm like, oh fuck, this is a business book. This is kind of weird. And weirdly enough for me, because I love business stuff, I love reading business books, and then I'm a huge Nintendo fan, you'd think it'd be like the perfect book for me, right? It definitely is on my alley, but I'll sort of get to what I ultimately feel about it later. But yeah, I wanted to just call out some of the things that like I thought were really interesting in the book. So the first is just he considers his biggest failure in Nintendo as being the launch price and the launch of the 3DS. So that being $249. So infamously, so this is more in America. I don't know if this happened in Australia, Swinny. You'd have to, maybe if you Google it while we're chatting about it. But
if they did the famous price reduction.
Well, they had this infamous thing that happened where they launched it, it didn't land the way they thought it was, right? And they actually then decreased the price by $50 within a year or something like that, and created an ambassador program. So anyone who had bought it at full price would get, I think it was 10 Game Boy Advance games. And some of these games were never released ever, like on the 3DS or 3DS Virtual Console or any other mechanism. Like, it was the only way you could ever get those games was through this program. And yeah, he viewed it as the biggest failure. And I'll kind of get into like it with my final thoughts later, but like, he's a marketing guy. Like, he's always been a marketing guy. Like, his whole career is about marketing. And Nintendo of America is not, the thrust of Nintendo. That's all in Japan. Like, they make the games, they come up with the ideas for the system. Effectively, Nintendo of America has like, and this book makes it clear, and this is why it was so cool reading it. Nintendo of America has no say over the next console or what they're doing. Like, zero. Like, absolutely zero. Like, it was crazy to me to read that, and it's through a story, and it's the strongest chapter of the book, the first chapter of the book, right? About Satoru Iwata, the former president, the fourth president of Nintendo, who passed away while he was like serving as president. And effectively, it was like he had a meeting with him, and it was a bit of a weird meeting because he called him back to Japan. It's like, oh, okay, this is really weird. Like, I was just in Japan a few months ago. This is super unusual. And he's like, look, I've got to tell you two things. Like, one, my cancer's come back, and, we've got all this treatment for it, but, like, it's serious. And then the second part is, I want to show you this new thing that we're working on. And it was the Switch, right? But the thing is, this was like 1 year before they announced the Switch. So, and these things take 3, 4, 5 years. To me, it's like incredible to hear the CEO of Nintendo America is not aware of what Nintendo Japan are planning to do, and only gets looped in like a year before, like they go to announce it. That's just phenomenal to me.
That's crazy, given how how you have to do budgets, and
Yeah.
you budget for the next financial year based on your strategy, and the strategy of launching a brand new console is pretty big.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah, and then the other part of it was like, and I'm throwing things out there, like just as I'm sort of talking about it, and it just shows you about like the Japanese culture, and you're more aware of this when you like having studied Japanese and understanding the business culture a bit more than I know nothing about it, but there's funny tidbits like, Reggie, and I work with very senior people at the place that I work, but whenever
that was close.
yeah, I know. Reggie, when he would travel to Nintendo Japan, he would have to get a new login and password to log into the corporate Wi-Fi on his phone and laptop, personally to him. And he would have to like wait in line, go to the security, go, these are my credentials. And they'd go, okay, here's your password, here's your username to log in. And he'd have to do that every time he visited Nintendo Japan to be able to log in. And he would plan around his day, go, okay, I've got to get there early on the first day because I need to be able to log in and check in and everything. I'm like, fuck me. This guy is like, to me, he is a bit of the face, or he was the face of Nintendo, even though it's like just the American arm. But they don't trust him effectively, right?
You know what I think? I think Reggie was the one behind the Nintendo Giga leak. It was his revenge.
It was pissed. And then like the final bit of that is like, there was this basically this top executive level sessions that they would have. You know how you have like executive leadership teams, all this other kind of stuff, right? It was this special call that they would have with the global president and some of the executive vice presidents in Japan. And Reggie was never invited to that through his whole tenure. He actually tried to get invited to it he's like, oh, I get closer. It's better if I'm closer to what's happening. Like, what's the next console that we're thinking of making? And he never got on it, like all the way through. And yet, there was one guy who technically was a Nintendo Japan employee who'd worked in America for 25 years. I can't remember the guy's name. He's Japanese national. So technically a Nintendo Japan employee, but worked in the American office for 25 years. And he was in those calls, but he was like a level below Reggie officially it's just like really and I'm a huge Nintendo fan and I love business. Like this kind of stuff to me was the best part of the book. It was like, holy shit, this is so crazy. Like the machinations of how it works.
I wonder if Reggie had to get the book vetted by Nintendo before release.
Wow, yeah, like dude, like there's some stuff in the book I'm like, I don't feel like they would have approved this book, man. And even his comments about Nintendo of America, it's quite like aggressive. Like he, because obviously you've got the whole labor union and, labor disputes happening with Nintendo now, right?
Yeah.
And some of his commentary is pretty, I don't know, pretty stark, to be honest. He's like, he said
like
some stuff like, that's not the Nintendo that I left. I was like, ooh, that's like not really what you'd be saying with a place that would want you back.
It's generally regarding like contractors and things, isn't it? And
yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother story, but it's basically like, effectively there's like two Nintendos. There's Nintendo of America employees and then there's contractors. They call them associates there. And they're not allowed to go into the facilities and all.
Associates.
They don't even get Wi-Fi passwords.
Well, yeah, they definitely wouldn't. But they're just contractors, right? Because they're for QA and translation and sort of like they're not.
I guess, but where I work, contractors literally have exactly the same everything as a normal employee.
Well, where I work, they don't. Like, they don't even get. They're not even allowed to have phones. Like, they have to bring their own phones. So yeah, it's interesting how different companies do it, but. Yeah, like it really gives you an insight to go, wow, okay, like obviously he's hooked into the most senior people in Nintendo, but then it just shows like Nintendo is so Japanese and they're dominating the company and like what they want to do and where they think, you know, the important ideas are. And it will definitely shape my view on Nintendo and kind of like trying to guess what they're going to do, because it does show they do not care about the American market specifically. Even though the American market is where they make most of their money, they're all their ideas are from a Japanese perspective. It's very fascinating. And, you know, even when he joined the company, he was sort of reflecting, hey, look, I, you know, played video games all my life. I love the Super Nintendo. And then, you know, when he joined, he had an Xbox and a PlayStation 2, but he didn't have a GameCube. And he's like saying, like, this is a problem. Like, and, you know, the Nintendo at the time were like, yeah, no, like we get that, but we don't really look at other companies. Like we just do our thing and we don't focus on what they do, what they think works. And you can see this through games like Splatoon, where it genuinely feels like they have not looked at how any other multiplayer shooter works and the lobbies and everything like that. Like it's almost like they're trying to invent it themselves, like as they go.
Does he talk at all about the launch and like that, the whole Wii U thing? Does he talk about that?
Yeah. So like he was there from like 2004. So effectively he talks about the launch of the DS, the Wii, the Wii U, the Switch, the 3DS, the DS, because he was there around that time. And also this little bad boy, I'll go back to the Wii U. This little device, the Gameboy Micro, which I love.
I didn't know you had a micro.
Yeah, of course.
I should have remembered. So.
And he hates this thing. He not only didn't want to launch it in America, he actually said we should just cancel the project globally.
Why?
Look, like this didn't sell. Like he's ultimately right. He's ultimately
Have you seen
correct.
his hands? Man, he couldn't hold.
Maybe that's why.
I've got small hands, and look at it. It looks small in my hand.
The only thing smaller is the bloody Game Gear mini thing that they made, the keychain game.
Yeah. But like for Mike, it would be the equivalent of like this. Like holding it like that. That's what Reggie looks like when he's trying to hold it. It's like ridiculous. So yeah, no, he was just saying it's impossible to hold for like a regular sized person. I've played a lot of games on this. I've got small hands, and it's like I feel like it's small, right? So for someone who had hands like, you know, Mike size hands or Reggie size hands, and Reggie's a big dude, like big dude, like 6'5" or something like that.
He's restless size.
Yeah, he's restless.
Would have been a
size.
wrestler if he wasn't president.
He's never the shortest person. He's always the tallest.
I heard an excerpt that like he's been mistaken for bodyguards at Nintendo events by like staff and things. So.
Yeah, and look, I know I'm going all over the place.
Well,
with
security,
this
I should say, not bodyguard, security.
Yeah, so that was actually one of the. That was the first. That was when he came out and said, you know, I'm here to take names and kick ass and, you know, make games and all that kind of stuff, right? That was so no one knew who he was. So when he walked into E3, I think it was E3. I can't recall if it was E3 or GDC, but it was an event like that. When he walked in, he just walked straight through, like in all the like right past the media. No one asked him a question.
Nice.
Like the president of Nintendo, and he was just like, no one knew him at that time, right? And like, I'll just put my cards on the table here. I never thought of Reggie as a black guy, but this book, he's
Mixed.
like, no, but like, I don't know. I just never thought of him as a black guy, right? But he is like all the way through the book, like as a black man, you know, as the first black president of Nintendo and all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, that's really interesting. Like, I know, like I'm just putting the cards on the table. I never thought of him as a black guy. I must admit, I don't really think a lot about people's races, but it just was a bit stark when I read that. And yeah, he was kind of saying, and I like, it's interesting the commentary from him, but with that anecdote about someone thinking he was a guard, because effectively he was just like looking at the show floor, Nintendo setting up, and then some Nintendo employee turned to him and goes, look, I've got credentials, like, you know, I'm meant to be here. And he's like, oh no, I'm just like observing. Like, I'm not a security guard. And he's like, oh, what does that say about people that they think a black guy is a security guard and he couldn't be an executive? But then I'm
Well, I
kind
don't
of
know
a
if
bit
it's because
like,
he's black. I think it's because he's 6'5".
yeah, I kind of agree. He's like a big dude who's watching everyone doing stuff, right? Without any credentials himself. I'm like, I kind of get that. So yeah, no, with the Wii U, and this is like, I'll dive into a little bit of my thoughts on the book. He's a marketing guy. So I feel like it's not very brutally honest, the book. You know, everything that he is able to spin and that went well, it's like, okay, that's Reggie who solved that, right? Like the classic story is because Japan, they didn't put Wii Sports into the Wii bundle. Like that didn't happen in Japan. You bought the Wii and you bought Wii Sports. And the Wii was popular in Japan, but it wasn't like in the West where it was bundled and, you know, parents, grandparents, everyone would play it. They'd get it straight away, right? And that was 100% Reggie pushing that. And everyone admits that, right? So, you know, big win, everything like that. But with the Wii U, he doesn't really he doesn't call out anything of his failings with the Wii U. It sort of just says, you know, it released and then we had to do like console bundles straight away. And then we had to do special edition consoles. And we all knew within a year, it's like, that's not a good sign, right? And the inventory is building up. They killed the white Wii U, which is a smaller 8GB model. And they just knew, like, we need to bring out a new console. The other thing that they said, and I don't know if this has ever been confirmed, and this is kind of going into what you're saying, Swinny. I definitely don't think this book was approved by Nintendo, but it would have been like, he would have had lawyers vetting it to make sure that they can defend things and it's not commercial secrets. But he said they decided to delay Breath of the Wild to coincide with the Switch. Now, I mean, it released on day one, the Switch released with the Wii U. It's like kind of like, duh, that's obvious. But the way he wrote it, it felt like maybe that game could have come out like a year before or even earlier. Because he said in the book, that game was slated and they felt like it would be ready by like 2014. And it came out in 2017. I'm like, fuck, man. Did they, like, if they delay that game by a year and a half, like, as you know, you're a Wii U owner when it was live, that's pretty dirty. Like, that's pretty dirty. Because they also removed features from the Wii U version of that game.
Yeah, and I mean, at that point, you got to start making decisions around your new stuff.
Well, exactly. And that's the kind of game that sells the console, so...
Yeah, no, I get it from a business point of view, but, like, as the 15 million people who bought a Wii U... Like, you'd be filthy about it, right? But, like, where I was a bit frustrated with the book and, like, getting back to the Wii part is that, like, sorry, the Wii U part is, for me, and I remember having this conversation with you, Swinny, the Wii U was marketed really poorly, along with being a bit of a complicated system, right?
Horribly.
I said at the time, like, I wasn't really, like, super switched on with gaming. I know what a Wii was, but I literally didn't know what a Wii U was.
Yeah.
And when you spoke to me about it, I'm like, what the fuck is a Wii U? Is that like a gamepad accessory to the Wii? Like, is this, you buy this gamepad thing and it connects to the Wii? Like, I literally didn't have a clue about it. I feel like that is like the name. Like, I've never been like, oh, the Wii, what a stupid name, right? Like, even he actually writes about that in the book as well. It's like, oh, we knew people were going to make fun of the name, but we liked the name, so we went with it. But I feel like the Wii U is just a shit name. Like, it doesn't, like, even if it was called Wii 2, like, I feel like someone like me who wasn't, like, super into it, I'd know, okay, this is, like, the next Wii. It's like
what about
PlayStation
Wii
2.
with two more eyes? The Roman numeral 2, so it's Wii.
Wii. But again, like, in the book, he doesn't at all call out anything that he did wrong in that space. And I'm like, dude, you're the head of marketing, you're the head of, like, Nintendo of America. You could have called it something different. Like, I think they would have had the ability to do that, and he didn't. So I feel like that's the biggest failing of the whole book. It's like Nintendo made a lot of, like, errors in the time that he ran it. I think they did a lot more good than they did wrong, but on balance, the book does not really cover the bad stuff at all. Like, it's very positive to what he's done, and very kind of like, I wanted it to be priced at $199, the 3DS, but Nintendo Japan forced me to do $249, and then we had to reverse, and that was my biggest failure. But I'm like, but you've just spent a whole bunch of time talking about how you didn't want it to be priced at $249.
Yeah,
so...
but I mean, going back to the part where he wasn't even allowed to go to their meetings at a top level,
That's
and going back to
right?
the part where they were trickling information way too late, it seems like Nintendo controlled everything. That he was
Nintendo of
almost,
Japan.
I wouldn't call him a puppet in that sense, because he wasn't nothing like that, but
Well, just going
not the
back to
kind of
this,
control
like
he
he was
should
at
have
the
had.
company when they released the Game Boy Micro, right? He didn't know about the Game Boy Micro until about 3 months before it launched. Like he didn't
That's what I
actually
mean.
know what it
That's-
was.
So what's his role in the end? You know what I mean? He runs the company, but he doesn't really run the company.
No, but
He runs the American marketing arm of the company.
Yeah, but this literal little handout that I
ran.
love, and I want to get the Famicom faceplates when I'm in Japan, but because you can actually remove the faceplates of this mic.
Cool.
So this triggered a whole bunch of change at Nintendo of America, because he like reflected. It's like, how ridiculous is it that I don't know about this fucking handheld that, by the way, it's priced so expensively and the DS was out. It's like, what are we trying to do here? We've got the Game Boy Advance and then we've got the DS. It's like, it doesn't make any sense, like from a strategy point of view.
I remember everyone was confused when it was announced as well.
Yeah, and also you lose stuff with this. Like, you can't play Game Boy games. Like, I think this is the only Game Boy Advance you can't play Game Boy games. So it's just like really weird.
All I know is that I definitely miss Reggie as the face of like Western Nintendo.
Yeah.
Doug Bowser seems like a
was a
decent
character.
dude, but Reggie just felt like he had that connection with the community. And you look at obviously, and Iwata was the same as well. But
Yeah.
it feels everything that Nintendo do publicly now with their presentations feel way more disconnected than they ever were. And they're in a great position financially, business-wise, and they're killing it. But I think as a fan, and as a fan that's grown up with Nintendo, it definitely doesn't feel the same.
Yeah, I think, and he was a huge driver of that. He didn't actually, disappointingly, he didn't talk much about like Nintendo Direct. Like, I was kind of hoping he'd have a bit more verbatim on Nintendo Direct, but he talked around it, like around the strategy of, wanting to get people excited about things that are coming up, where they're at right now, engaging with the fan base. He did speak about, pre E3, like, let's put a presentation together, put it out there. You know what I mean? Like, so like, they totally changed the game in that space, and everyone has finally caught up and copied them. And we'll see how Xbox does, because their like presentations like a month away for Bethesda and Microsoft, I think. We called it out in your 1 min for the swing. But yeah, the only, like, just going back to Iwata and him. So the guy who's actually the current global president of Nintendo, that I wouldn't remember his name if I had a bet. And I'm like, we're following this stuff day to day. I don't know if you remember his name.
I was trying to think of it earlier, and I'm like, I cannot remember.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? Furukawa, right? So he's from the Pokemon side and then jumped in. I think you're on mute, Mike, by the way.
So I was saying, because Reggie's a cool name.
I was kind of thinking of just letting that run for the rest of the show.
You should have
but-
just let it run, yeah.
No, Reggie is the global. It's a
cool name.
Reggie was a president of Nintendo America, but this is the global head. This is like the Japanese head,
Yeah.
Furukawa. But again, going into how weird the company is, like when Iwata was like, like ultimately dying, and Reggie wanted to visit him, like in hospital, and they're like, this doesn't happen in Japanese culture. This is like super taboo, right? You just can't visit someone you work with. Only friends visit people who are dying or sick, right?
Okay.
And then he eventually just kept on pushing, and it was like, eventually it was decided he's visiting as a friend. That's how they accepted it, right? But the crazy thing about it is, the person who coordinated all of this and was like the person organizing the trip for Reggie and everything like that was Furukawa. Like, it wasn't some other person. It was like literally Furukawa, who's now the current global president. He's like negotiating with Reggie, like what he's allowed to do or come and go see him. And then he was like pissed with him a bit. So Furukawa is like a really native English speaker, basically, because he spent a whole bunch of time in Europe. So he's one of the few Nintendo Japan execs who would just speak in English to the English execs, whereas Iwata speaks English, but he would always still have a Japanese translator. And Reggie said in the book, he's like, I think he did that so then he got extra time to think of like a response or an answer. So he'd hear it in English and then hear it in Japanese. It's like, okay, I've got double the time now to respond. But yeah, Furukawa, it's like, he was actually a bit pissed at Reggie effectively. He's like, because you've done this and people have heard about it.
You have dishonored our company.
No, it's more that other senior Japan execs have now visited Owada.
No, everyone wants to go visit him.
He's like,
oh my god.
He's like, this is unacceptable, like to happen. So, yeah, very like it. Look, it's a super fascinating book. That I just want to shout out like the whole Mother 3 thing. Like I know that the news has already come out, but it's only in the audiobook, which is kind of like you'd be pissed if you bought the book, but in the audio book they've got the extra interview with Jeff Keighley and Reggie. And they talk about Mother 3, and again, there's no way this was like vetted by Nintendo or like approved by them, but he's like, yeah, they came really close. They did Earthbound Beginnings. Now, they already had that translated, by the way. So, but they'd never released it in the West. So they released that on the virtual console, and they were discussing, yeah, do we just translate Mother 3? Like, we always get bothered about it. And it got back to them saying, well, Earthbound didn't sell in America when it came out, so there's just not much interest for Mother 3. Like, this is like, they're so Japanese. It's so Japanese.
Damn. It's a PR gain. It's not a financial gain. Come on.
This is what I kind of love about Nintendo, their insanity, that they're literally going back to like 1995, of course, 1995 to say, well, the sales in 1995 of Earthbound in America were not strong, so we do not want to translate this game in like 2015. Right? Like, it's so Nintendo. It's so funny. It's so odd. And also, by the way, people have done like fan translations. Like Nintendo
amazing fan translations.
Nintendo is like the last company in the world to ever do this, but they genuinely could easily contact those people. Because there's a set list of people. It's not like a million people. They could just go to those people and go, we'll give you some royalties for this. You've done a great job. And you'll be in the credits. And can we take your translation? So, the cost would be like, they could make the cost like literally
minimum
50 grand, right? Yeah. Something like that. And make a mozza on this game. Just release it digitally. I mean, like, let's be real, Swinny. If they release like a special edition for like $499 of Mother 3, people would buy it. Like, I'm not saying it would sell like millions, but they could make a bit of money on this game.
It's got to have scratch and sniff things.
Yeah, true. In an oversized box, right? But it's so Nintendo. And this book, the best part of it is that it sort of, highlights that. So yeah, just getting to my overall thoughts. Look, it's a short book. It's like 224 pages. So it never overstays its welcome. But for me, it never really like has a killer punch, or there's nothing really kind of like massively like, oh my God, that's such a good insight. Because I like the business side of things. And honestly, all the business stuff is super generic. It's like so fucking generic. Like, it feels like read 100 business books and it's just regurgitating it. It doesn't have a specific lens to things. Like, he even talks about really great business books like Blue Ocean Strategy, Innovator's Dilemma, some of these books, but they have like a very interesting theme. Like, you need to look for a blue ocean versus a red ocean. Red ocean is lots of sharks in the water, lots of blood. You need to go for the blue ocean where there's no sharks and dominate in that space, right? Interesting business idea. But this book, there's kind of like no thread to it. It's just random shit of like, be accountable, make sure people understand what they need to do. Listen to people, but then be tough if you need to. It's like, fuck, this is just like super generic advice that you would like see generated in like some kind of like YouTube clip.
Speaking of YouTube clips, I don't know if you noticed or it's just on my screen, but when you said it's got no, what did you say, specific lens or something?
Punch or whatever.
You went out of focus.
Because I put my hand up.
I think your camera is set autofocus, yeah. Yeah. Like, good timing.
But like, what I'll do now is I'll characterize this as, how could I rate this book if it was a Nintendo console? Right? So this is a bit different way to do it.
Okay.
This book is not a Nintendo Switch or a Super Nintendo, right? Where just like absolute bangers, like every chapter is awesome and everything like that. I would put this book as a Nintendo 64. And I've thought about this and why, right?
Okay, just a quick question though. What are you? Are there other Nintendo books to compare it against? How does the comparison work relative to what? I don't get it. Are you kind of saying like Switch is a really good console, and I don't know, that thing you just showed me is a really shit console? That's the scale. I'm like, I don't know what the
Can I
scale is.
ask you-
I don't know what a good console is for
Is this,
Nintendo. And what
is this a
isn't.
weird thing to say, or is this like Mike an idiot?
I think Integot should finish his thought.
Okay.
But do you understand what I'm saying, Swinny? I don't want to.
Yeah, I'm a little confused because I like
Oh,
64
okay.
more than Switch, but I know
That's
what
what I
he's saying.
mean.
know what
I'm
he's saying.
confused.
I
What's
know
good,
what he's
what's
saying.
bad?
I know what he's saying.
Yeah, I like when I was even thinking of this, I was like, the one thing is Swinny's an asshole and goes, yeah, but I really love the 64.
I do.
What I would say is that this is like the Nintendo 64, right? So just like this book, the Nintendo 64 is punctuated with games that are like games that you legitimately could say are the best game of all time. I could mount an argument. Mario 64 is the best game of all time. Ocarina of Time is the best game of all time. There's multiple games where you go, these are just 10 out of 10, 100 out of 100 games potentially, right? And there's like 1/3 of the console that is full of racing games, right? That are, and arcade games, right? And that is shit, right?
Gotcha.
And there's big flaws in the library, like 2D games, kind of shit on the console. right?
RPGs.
No RPGs. There's like a game called like what is it, Hero Quest or whatever RPG, and it's shit.
It's Quest 64.
Quest 64, that's right, Quest 64. And that's what I think about the book. That there's like I could literally say to you, Swinny, because I know you'd be maybe on the fence of reading this. I'm like, read chapter 1, read chapter blah, read chapter that, and you get the most out of the book, right?
Okay.
Because there's just like a lot of stuff in there that's like racing games. And I'm like, this is like, I don't really need this. Like, it's not brilliant advice. It's not super interesting. It feels like Reggie patting himself on the back a little bit.
So it's the Top Gear rally of
Yes.
business
Yes.
and video games.
It's not the V-dub racing.
Okay.
It's, just the generic. Yeah, so look, and if you take that attitude, I think you'll be fine. Like, if you're a Nintendo fan, yeah, I think it's worth a read. And you know what chapters are just the Nintendo chapters. I'd kind of almost say skip the other chapters. But if it's for business, I definitely wouldn't rate this book as a business book. There's no like clear thread of, or idea. There's no idea in this book. It's just generic advice, which I don't understand why he structured it like that personally. So, but ultimately, I like the book, Nintendo 64. I like that console. It's like sitting over there, I think, right now. So it's not like I hate it or anything, but yeah, I'm sure no one on the internet has said that disrupting the game is the Nintendo 64 equivalent of consoles. So
No, that's a unique take, and thank you for that review. It's I know it's everyone out there has been like, oh, this is just the highlights and not talking about what is the overall experience of the book that I've, like they're obviously video game news websites. That's what they do. You get the headline, but it's good to hear the actual thing as a whole.
no, cool.